Welcome, attendees and exhibitors, to the last day of the 2017 NRA show. My name is John Sheehan. I'm the head of law enforcement sales for Veridian Weapon Tech. And as always, all of these segments are being filmed using our Fact Duty HD weapon-mounted cameras. And I have with me today Sarah Cade.
Hello.
Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi. So I am an X-ray tech by day, and my hobby is competition pistol shooting. And I also do a lot of local advocacy for the Second Amendment in my state. So I'm from Minnesota. We have kind of an interesting political climate up there. So yeah, it's good times.
So Minnesota, it kind of, for those people that don't know about Minnesota and kind of, you know, where we are politically up there and just the fight that you do have all the time, why can you kind of explain that too?
Minnesota is interesting. It's kind of a purple state, so it's not so much the well, it is a little bit, but it's not so much the oppositional Democrat versus Republican as much as it is in some of the other states. We actually have a lot of pro-gun Democrats in our state that work with us in passing new gun laws, favorable gun laws, hopefully. So yeah.
Okay. Now, also on that too is you've got people that are passionate, obviously, on both sides. People that don't think that we should have the rights that we have to carry weapons. And then, of course, you have the people that are more like-minded, like yourself, that really do believe in that. So, when you're coming in contact with these people, what kind of context are you doing it? I know you have a blog. And besides the blog, do you regularly go out and engage these people and do debates, things like that with them?
Well, I do Instagram, I do Facebook, and occasionally I'll do some comment section of the local paper. And also I do in-person engagements too. For me, it's all about experiences. So the best thing for me is to make friends with someone that I disagree with and take them to the range. That's the #1 best way to change somebody's mind.
Okay, that's crazy because it's somebody that you disagree with, and if they vehemently disagree with you, I've got to know how you're able to get them out to the range. How does that happen?
You know, it starts with finding common ground. That's the most important thing you can do. I mean, it's really all about that. If you can make them into an ally instead of an enemy, that's ideal. And the way you do that is to just make it, just do a single issue focus. And in every other way that you talk to that person, find common ground in something else. Like, okay, maybe we don't disagree on, or maybe we don't agree on background checks, but maybe we agree on something else. So let's find something. We'll just keep going down the list until we find something we agree on. There's got to be something somewhere.
Right, that's so important too. And then the other thing we talked about prior to going on is about, you know, even though it's a very passionate issue, your disposition, how important that is when you're actually going to enter into these discussions, debates with people. So, you know, elaborate on that you have to.
Oh yeah, that's a big one too. It's all about breaking down that oppositional mindset. So if you view a debate as an opportunity to really like get one over on the other guy and like dominate them verbally and just make them admit that they're wrong in every way, that is never going to change anyone's mind. It's basically just preaching to the choir. Like, your friends will think you're really clever, but if you look at what impact you're having on the debate, it's a net negative. So the key there is to just build an alliance with someone. Just build a little bit of rapport. You might disagree on assault weapons, but you might agree on gun safety education. So you can talk about something like that and just build that into some form of common rapport that you can actually just connect with them on a human level. So it's not going to make you look cool. You're not going to come up with the most clever, you know, line on the internet. But it is going to change minds. And especially when you look at the people on the other side of the issue. You know, they don't want to see you winning. They want to see you respecting them. They want to save face. They want to just feel like they're acknowledged as a human being. And if you can do that, you'll get your point across way better. You might not convince the person you're arguing with, but you might convince an audience of bystanders that are like, you know, I don't agree with everything she said, but she made some good points.
What's the biggest group you've ever had to address?
Oh, that was probably, I did a debate at the League of Women Voters in Bloomington, Minnesota. And there was, I would say, maybe around 100 in the crowd, not counting like public testimony. There's usually more people for that. But as far as like an actual debate, that was probably the biggest crowd I've addressed. And I was pretty nervous about that. But at the end of the debate, I had a lot of people, a lot of actually very hardcore left-leaning people, came up to me and shook my hand and said, you know, I don't agree with everything, but you made some good points, and I'm going to have to think about this issue a little further.
And it's probably because of the way you delivered it too, because like we were saying earlier, is if you just approach it from the standpoint of some logic, some common ground, and you're not rattled.
Right.
You know, Mark Walters was talking about that yesterday when he was up here on stage, is that the biggest disappointment he gets against with somebody in a debate is when he is talking and he stays calm. And he's very friendly, and he's very open, and he's congenial, because they're looking for that person arguing on our side of things to just get really emotional, very angry, and kind of get over the top, and then that kind of brings home their point that that's not the type of person that should have a gun.
Exactly.
So maybe for people that are going to be watching this video and people out here, kind of give them some pointers for exactly, you've kind of already touched on a little bit, but if they're sitting at Starbucks and they get into that type of conversation with somebody, what's the best openers, and how would you handle that?
That is a great question. So one of the best things you can do is just be prepared. And I know a lot of gun owners are already right up there. We know these issues inside and out. So that's our advantage right there. So one of the best things you can do is just know a few common arguments that work for people with different values than yours. So if you lean more conservative, take a little bit of time to maybe make a liberal friend and find out what appeals to them about the Second Amendment. A lot of times you can appeal to values like fairness or equality rather than values like patriotism, you know, some of the more traditional conservative ones. So stuff like that can really help you. Other than that, as far as convincing someone face-to-face, the best thing you can do is ask them questions. So if they tell you something, go ahead and let them be wrong. And this is going to be really hard for you to do, but they're like, nobody needs an assault rifle for hunting. Like, well, you know, that's an interesting point, but what do you think about this? And try to find some topic with them that you can agree on. You can circle back to the other things later once you build that connection. But if you just try to convince them that they're wrong about something, you're never going to get anywhere.
Oh, you're right, absolutely. And then the other thing, too, is I know from your standpoint that you're very well educated on the subject as well. So maybe give people some tips on what they can bone up on prior to going in, because I think the more educated you are, the less likely you are to kind of get more emotional or angry during the course of the debate if you've got all that knowledge on your side. So what are the types of things that you really kind of studied up on and all that, just to really have that good common base where you always had something in your pocket that you could throw out there?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So try not to laugh at this, but I argue on Facebook all the time, and that's where I get a lot of my material from. The internet's a great forum for this to kind of bone up on your research, because you can actually engage with somebody with a different opinion, and they'll bring up a point that bothers them about your opinion. You have a little bit of time to research and find another point that appeals to them. So for example, one of the #1 hot button issues right now is background checks. So for background checks, if you're talking to a more liberal audience, one of the things you can do is talk about controversial rights. So obviously this is another hot button issue, but you can compare it to access to abortion. So that's another hot button right. How do you exercise a right that is controversial, that other people don't want you to have? How do you make sure that people have access to that right? So by doing something like that, you can take that argument, even if you don't agree with it, and just put it in terms that appeal more to that other person.
Okay, and then obviously you're very well versed on Second Amendment issues, possibly laws, things like that.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit, and then I suppose because of the different gun laws in Minnesota as opposed to other states, did you kind of like bone up on that too and kind of understand your rights there? Yeah,
for my state, my group is called the Minnesota Gun Owners Caucus. Our website has a frequently asked questions section, so if anyone that wants to learn a little bit more about state statute can go there. They can check that out. Kind of gives you a little base to argue from. If you know a little bit about what a little background on the law, it's a lot easier to explain it to people that maybe don't know.
Okay, so we talked about the do's. Now let's talk about the don'ts.
Yes.
You kind of briefly spoke about social media.
Right.
And what would be some things that we need to avoid besides becoming overly passionate or angry during one of these debates?
Yep.
What would your pointers be as far as what to stay away from?
If you can, now this is the most difficult thing to do. I don't even know how to explain how to do it. But if you can keep your ego out of it, and instead of thinking about winning for you because you want to win and it feels good to win, and I know it does, I understand that, but if you can keep that out of it and think about the movement as a whole, and what are you putting out there for other people to see? You know, it feels good to win, but it's not helping us at all. So if you can really change that dialogue and make it more of a human connection than a win versus lose thing, that helps the movement. It doesn't make you look cool, and sometimes you got to eat a little bit of crow, but it's worth it overall in the long run.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm assuming that, you know, when you're in Minnesota, you carry most of the time now, and
when I can.
When you can, yeah. And when we go into places that don't allow it, we have to go put them away and all that stuff too. So,
right.
Yeah. With that, so you know, you're such a poised and educated young woman, and you know, how did you get into firearms and competition shooting, and were you brought up that way, or how did that all happen, Sarah?
I just started about 5 years ago, and so I'm barely a millennial. I'm a millennial by like 1 year, so you'll probably laugh at this too. But I saw IDPA on YouTube, and I thought it looked really fun, so I just started. I found an instructor in my area, and kind of got mentored and learned how to do competition shooting, and just kind of jumped right in with both feet.
No kidding.
But yeah, social media, that's how I found out about how much fun guns were.
So as soon as you got into the whole competition aspect of it, then how did that morph into your own blog and all that?
So I just really mainly argue on Facebook, but as far as that goes, I went to a couple meet and greets, which if anyone's not already doing that, definitely do that. It's a great way to get networked into your Second Amendment community at home. And by doing that, I was exposed to some of the leadership of the local advocacy groups. And that was such a huge help to me. And they just kind of suck you right in. Once you start learning about the laws, you start learning a little bit about the perception of gun owners in the media. It's like you can't really sit still at that point. Like, you need to act. And so that's how I got into it.
Okay, and then do you have any contact with any of the leadership in the NRA? Do you ever speak with them or anything, or?
I'm familiar with our state NRA representative, but other than that, I don't have a lot of contact with NRA leadership. So.
Okay, all right. And then as far as politicians, do you ever have any contact with them, or you ever go to an office of anybody, or email them, or how does that? What happens there?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I actually changed my legislator's mind on an issue, believe it or not.
Really? Which legislator?
So it was my state representative named Peter Fisher. So in 2015, Minnesota was working on getting suppressors or silencers legalized in our state. So we did kind of an educational campaign amongst our own ranks, you know, to kind of get people familiar with the idea. What's a suppressor? What does it do? Why do we need them? And we also had some conversations with legislators. A lot of them were hostile. I live right in the middle of a major metro area, so my representative is about as anti-gun as you can get. But through those techniques of just trying to build a human connection, trying to appeal to values, appealing to the values that are important to that person rather than what's important to you, I was able to actually change my legislator's mind on that issue. And he wrote me a letter and said, oh, thanks to your letter and some other letters I've received, I realized that I was wrong on this issue, and I've changed my vote. I've decided to vote for suppressors, and he did.
And what happened with the suppressor vote?
And it passed. We're legal now, so yeah.
Yeah, good job. Excellent, great job.
Yeah.
Well, Sarah, I know we're not going to keep you up here very long and everything, and I know you've got things to do and places to be, but man, it's been great, and it's been an education, and I hope everybody out here can get something out of that when next time they go down and sit with a cup of coffee and and have a polite disagreement with someone that they maybe can turn them a little bit. And I think you've given us some education on that today. So thank you so much for coming up here.
You.
Appreciate it. Give Sarah a hand.
All right, thanks for your time.